prestigious international...
Hello from Jonathan and me. Welcome to the programme.
First tonight, the fire brigade that's decided to cancel its annual service to remember Britain's war dead.
On the eve of Remembrance Day, Anglia tonight has discovered that Norfolk Fire and Rescue Service won't be holding its annual religious service.
In a moment, we'll be asking for your views. But first, we can join Malcolm Robertson, who's at the Norfolk Fire headquarters in Hethersett, near Norwich, for us. Malcolm, this really is a controversial decision, then.
Yes, you can say that again. It's been taken by the new chief of Norfolk Fire Service, and he accepts that he's left himself open to criticism on this one. He says he's taken the decision because several members of his staff have felt uncomfortable about this religious service in the past. But as you'd expect, it's provoked strong reaction both from within the church and also from the Royal British Legion. For many people, this is a very emotional week, remembering those who've been killed or injured in conflicts around the world. On the eve of Remembrance Day, the Royal British Legion's Poppy Shop in Norwich was a popular place for people wanting to make their contribution. Around the region tomorrow, there'll be hundreds of services, including a whole range of organisations, but one's decided to cancel theirs. Norfolk Fire Service has traditionally held a service of remembrance, but there won't be a formal one tomorrow. The reason? The new Chief Fire Officer has said that some people felt uncomfortable at last year's service, and he wants the organisation to move away from what he describes as a religious approach to a more secular one. Some firefighters are angry at the decision. They were told the most appropriate way of observing Remembrance Day was a 2-minute silence in the workplace rather than a formal religious service which was held in the past. They say lots of firefighters were lost during the Blitz, and services are a proper way of remembering them.
Norwich has again been raided, and a lot of damage has been done here as at Bath.
Leading figures in the clergy believe the decision's very short-sighted.
It's almost as if at the big times in our lives, the church can hold us in a way that simply keeping a moment's silence doesn't have the same effect at all. The church can be there, it can offer words of comfort, it offers a sense of history, that what's happening to us now is part of a much bigger story. And people take a great deal of comfort in that. And I'm not sure who has the right to say to somebody that that can't be available to them.
Those working for the Royal British Legion preparing for Remembrance Day say it's a strange decision.
Speaking personally, I can't see why they cannot hold a religious service. It's very traditional, and I think the Poppy Day, and we are celebrating our 90th birthday next year, and it is very much traditional that they have the religious service together with the 2-minute silence.
The silence will be held in the Fire Service headquarters mess room, where the religious service has been held in the past. The Chief Fire Officer told me some of his staff had expressed their annoyance at his decision, but that he has a diverse workforce and has to cater for all of them. You've had this service for many years. It's a way of remembering those who've made the ultimate sacrifice. There'll be people who say you've got this wrong.
Well, I've thought very carefully about this because we wanted to make sure that people did have that space to make that act of remembrance, and we must make sure this doesn't overshadow the fact that this is about an act of remembrance, people gathering together and spending time to remain in silence and reflect on those who have gone before.
He recognises it's a controversial decision, but says the important point is that those who've lost their lives are always remembered.
Well, Malcolm, as you said, this really is a bold decision for the Chief Fire Officer to take. He must realise he's let himself in for a fair amount of criticism.
Yes, I think he accepts that if you make a decision about religion, you leave yourself open to condemnation. The one thing I would say, though, is that whether the decision is right or wrong, he has at least come out and talked about it. So often with big organisations, they will hide behind a statement and they won't front up for an interview. He has done that. He also has said, interestingly, that Norfolk Fire Service is a listening organisation, so presumably if there are members of his staff who feel there should be a religious service next year, he will listen to that, and presumably it could even be returned.
OK, thank you, Malcolm. Well, we want to hear what you think. Do you feel that Norfolk Fire Service is right not to include a religious element in its remembrance service, or is this going too far?
Well, you can get in touch through Twitter, you can go to our Facebook page, or, of course, you can email us. It's jonathanandbecky@itv.com. Now, we're going to try and bring you some of your responses a little later in the programme.
Now, 8 years after the Potters Bar train crash, the companies in charge of the track and its maintenance are to face criminal charges.
7 people were killed and 76 injured when the London to Cambridge and Kings Lynn train was derailed by faulty points. Now, Network Rail and Jarvis Rail are to face trial on health and safety charges.
Martin Sue joins us now from the station at Potters Bar in Hertfordshire. Martin.
Well, yes, the Office of Rail Regulation said today there was sufficient evidence to charge both Jarvis and Network Rail under the Health and Safety Act for failing to provide proper training and maintenance. Things could have actually been worse for the two companies. Had calls for their corporate managers to be charged with corporate manslaughter being carried out, but they were turned down by the Crown Prosecution Service. Nevertheless, this is a very big deal, with both companies now facing unlimited fines for their role in the accident which cost 7 lives and left 76 others injured.
Captured on CCTV, this is the moment the 1245 to Kings Lynn derailed. Travelling at nearly 100 miles per hour, the rear carriage leaves the rails, flips on its side and slides onto the platform of Potters Bar station. 6 passengers were killed. Emma Knights from Cambridgeshire, German Cambridge graduate Jonelle Schickler, Austin Kark, Alexander Ogunwusi, Chia Sin Lu and Chia Chinwoo. A 7th victim, 80-year-old Agnes Quinlivan, was killed by falling debris. Today, the relatives of Austin Kark welcome the news that criminal charges will be brought against Network Rail and Jarvis.
We're all exhausted. We're drained by it. And we never escape it. It's never, people move on or closure or any of those dreadful phrases is totally impossible. And only now, with this, are we actually able to say, well, what's been done is done and that's right and proper.
It wasn't until the 1st of June, 8 years after the crash, a coroner's inquest finally began. A jury heard evidence from passengers about how there'd been a violent jolt before the train ran over the faulty points. A week later, they visited the station to see the crash site for themselves. On the 30th of July, the jury concluded that a points failure had caused the crash. They found they were unsafe and not inspected or maintained adequately. It's that ruling which will form the basis of the charges.
I asked the Office of Rail Regulation what the point was myself today, and they said, well, it's a reputational matter. And that, I think, is what it is. It's almost like a kind of official revenge 8 years on. But what purpose it really serves, I don't know. The lessons have long been learnt. At least I sincerely hope that's the case.
I think it's important for a number of reasons, primarily so that those injured and those who are bereaved following a crash of this nature can see that justice is going to be done. It's also, on any basis, necessary that it serves as a wake-up call, so insofar as that is necessary, to those conducting that similar work at this point.
Compensation claims for those killed or injured are still pending. The charges levelled against Network Rail and Jarvis will be heard in Watford in January.
Martin, it's interesting that one of the companies facing charges didn't exist back in 2002 and the other has gone bust. How does that work?
Well, yeah, it's all very confusing, Victoria. Back in 2002, Railtrack ran the railways. That's now Network Rail. But that's quite clear legally because they took on the legal liability. So if found guilty, they will face the fine. Jarvis is a little more complicated because they went into administration earlier this year. I spoke to their administrators, Deloitte, who told me that if found guilty, the fine will be added to their list of liabilities. Now, that means it's basically the money they'll pay out if they can find the money and if they've got any assets. Whether they do, who knows? We should hopefully find out more when that trial goes to court in Watford in January.
All right, Martin, thank you very much for that. Right, moving on.